Hi, boys and girls. Today we're going to continue with Ramona and her father. We're going to read chapter 6 called The Sheep Suit. I want you to pay attention when we're reading this to hear how this story is different than a story like Dear Primo, how this story is told in third person. So listen to how the narrator talks about Ramona, and it's not Ramona talking. All right, I also want you to pay attention how this story is told from the point of view of Ramona. Okay, so really listen for that. Ramona did not expect trouble to start in Sunday school of all places, but that was where it was touched off one Sunday early in December. Sunday school began as usual. Ramona sat on a little chair between Davy and Howie with the rest of their class in the basement in the gray stone church. Mrs. Russo, the superintendent, clapped her hands for attention. "Let's have quiet, boys and girls," she said. It was time to make plans for our Christmas Carol program and nativity scene. Bored, Ramona hooked her heels on the rungs of her little chair. She knew that what her part would be to put on a white choir robe and walk in singing carols with the rest of the second grade class, which would follow the kindergarten and first grade. The congregation always murmured and smiled at the kindergartners in their wobbly line, but nobody paid much attention to second graders. Ramona knew she would have to wait years to be old enough for a chance at a part in the nativity scene. Ramona only half listened until Mrs. Russo asked Beezus' friend Henry Huggins if he would like to be Joseph. Ramona expected him to say no because he was so busy training for the Olympics in about 8 or 12 years. He surprised her by saying, "I guess so." "And Beatrice Quimby," said Mrs. Russo, "would you like to be Mary?" This question made Ramona unhook her heels and sit up. Her sister, grouchy old Beezus, Mary? Ramona searched out Beezus, who was looking pink, embarrassed, and pleased at the same time. "Yes," answered Beezus. Ramona couldn't get over it. Her sister playing the part of Mary and getting to sit up there on the chancel in that manger they got out every year. Mrs. Russo had to call on a number of older boys before she found 3 who were willing to be wise men. Shepherds were easier. 3 6th grade boys were willing to be shepherds. While the planning was going on, a little voice inside Ramona was saying, me, what about me?" Until it could be hushed no longer, Ramona spoke up. "Mrs. Russo, I could be a sheep. If you have shepherds, you need a sheep." "Ramona, that's a splendid idea," said Mrs. Russo, getting Ramona's hopes up. "But I'm afraid the church does not have any sheep costumes." Ramona was not a girl to abandon her hopes if she could help it. "My mother could make a sheep costume," she said. "She's made me lots of costumes." Maybe lots was stretching the truth a bit. Mrs. Quimby had made Ramona a witch costume that lasted 3 Halloweens, and when Ramona was in nursery school, she had made her a little red devil suit. Now Mrs. Russo was in a difficult position because she had told Ramona her idea was splendid. "Well, yes, Ramona, you may be a sheep if your mother will make you a costume." Howie had been thinking things over. "Mrs. Russo," he said in that serious way of his, "wouldn't it look silly for 3 shepherds to herd just 1 sheep? My grandmother could make me a sheep costume, too. And my mother could make me one," said Davy. Sunday school was suddenly full of volunteer sheep, enough for a large flock. Mrs. Russo clapped her hands for silence. "Quiet, boys and girls. There isn't room on the chancel for so many sheep. But I think we can squeeze in 1 sheep per shepherd. Ramona, Howie, and Davy, since you asked first, you may be sheep if someone will make you costumes." Ramona smiled across the room at Beezus. They would be in the nativity scene together. When Sunday school was over, Beezus found Ramona and asked, "Where's Mother going to find time to make a sheep costume?" "After work, I guess." This problem was something Ramona had not considered. Beezus looked doubtful. "I'm glad the church already has my costume," she said. Ramona began to worry. Mrs. Quimby always washed her hair after church on Sunday morning. Ramona waited until her mother had taken her head out from under the kitchen faucet and was rubbing her hair on a bath towel. "Guess what?" said Ramona. "I get to be a sheep in the nativity scene this year." "That's nice," said Mrs. Quimby. "I'm glad they are going to do something a little different this year." "And I'll be Mary," said Beezus. Good, said Mrs. Quimby, still rubbing. I'll need a sheep costume, said Ramona. There's their mom washing her hair over the sink. The church has my costume, said Beezus. Ramona gave her sister a you hush up look. Beezus smiled serenely, and Ramona hoped she wasn't going to start acting like Mary already. Mrs. Quimby stopped rubbing to look at Ramona. And where are you going to get this sheep costume? She asked. Ramona felt very small. I thought you would make me a sheep suit. When? Ramona felt even smaller. After work? Mrs. Quimby sighed. Ramona, I don't like to disappoint you, but I'm tired when I come home from work, and I don't have time to do a lot of sewing. A sheep suit would have a lot of pieces and would be a lot of work and mean a lot of little pieces to put together, and I don't even know if I could find a sheep pattern. Mr. Quimby joined in the conversation. That was the trouble with a father with time on his hands. He always had time for other people's arguments. Ramona, he said, you know better than to involve other people in work without asking first. Ramona wished her father could sew. He had plenty of time. Maybe Howie's grandmother could make me a costume too, she suggested. We can't ask favors like that, said Mrs. Quimby. And besides, material costs money. And with Christmas coming and all, we don't have a nickel to spare. Ramona knew all this. She simply hadn't thought. And she wanted to be a sheep so much. She gulped and sniffed and tried to wiggle her toes inside her shoes. Her feet were growing and her shoes felt tight. She was glad she had not mentioned this to her mother. She would never get a costume if they had to buy shoes. Mrs. Quimby draped the towel around her shoulders and reached for her comb. I can't be a sheep without a costume, Ramona sniffed again. She would gladly suffer tighter shoes if she could have a costume instead. It's your own fault, said Mr. Quimby. You should have thought. Ramona now wished she had waited until after Christmas to persuade her father to give up smoking. Then maybe he would be nice to his little girl when she needed a sheep costume. Mrs. Quimby pulled the comb through her tangled hair. I'll see what I can do, she said. We have that old white terry cloth bathrobe with the sleeve seams that pulled out. It's pretty shabby, but if I bleach it, I might be able to do something with it. Ramona stopped sniffing. Her mother would try to make everything all right, but Ramona was not going to risk telling her about her tight shoes in case she couldn't make a costume out of the bathrobe and needed to buy material. That evening, after Ramona had gone to bed, she heard her father and mother in their bedroom talking in those low, serious voices that so often meant that they were talking about her. She slipped out of bed and knelt on the floor with her ear against the furnace outlet to see if she could catch their words. Her father's voice coming through the furnace pipe sounded hollow and far away. Why did you give in to her? He was asking. She had no business saying you would make a sheep costume without asking first. She has to learn sometime. I have learned, thought Ramona indignantly. Her father did not have to talk to her this way about her behind her back. I know, answered Ramona's mother in a voice also sounding hollow and far away. But she's little, and these things are so important to her. I'll manage somehow. You don't want a spoiled brat on our hands, said Ramona's father. But it's Christmas, said Mrs. Quimby, and Christmas is going to be slim enough this year. Comforted by her mother, but angry at her father, Ramona climbed back into bed. Spoiled brat? So that was what her father thought of her. All right, so we'll finish up this chapter next time. Did you hear how it's all told from Ramona's point of view? So that means that we're always with Ramona. And did you hear how the narrator is talking about Ramona? Instead of Ramona saying I, the narrator says Ramona and she and her. That means it's written in third person. All right, boys and girls, let's see if Ramona gets her sheep suit. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.